Okay, when you're ready.
Fab. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to lots of new faces. It's brilliant to have you with us. Just a couple of sort of reminders from me, that the meeting is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. Um, and where possible, if people could keep their cameras on and mics on mute when they're not speaking, just because it means that we don't get feedback and also we can sort of see each other, which is nice. And also if we could keep the chat to be for meeting admin only. So for example, if you're letting us know that you've got to leave early or something, if you've got any questions, if they can be directed through me and asked verbally, it's just easier for everyone to manage. And please, if you can, use the raise hand function when you want to speak because it bumps you up to the top of my list. And yes. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Okay, I wanted to come along, but my mum died last week, and it was her funeral yesterday. And I've got family here, so I can only stay for an hour. I'm so sorry, but I didn't not want to at least come along to the first part of the meeting.
I'm really sorry to hear that, and thank you for coming along for a bit of it. If you need to
Okay,
go and be with your family, that's
okay,
absolutely understandable and fine. So if
thank
you
you.
need to just drop a message in the chat and Alice can record that for you. But yeah, really sorry to hear
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Um, so I think what I will pass uh on to next is hand over to Alice to read out any apologies we've had.
Thank you. So we've just had apologies from Councillor Linda Smith, the Cabinet member, but officers are here to cover items and should be able to answer questions.
And then it's my chair's announcements. And the only thing I would like to do is welcome all of the new members to the panel, whether you are new to the panel or indeed new to the council as well. So great to have you all on board. Oh, yes, Alice.
Sorry, we just skipped over declarations of interest.
We did skip over declarations of interest. I'm so sorry. I can't count. Right. Are there any declarations of interest? You can obviously raise those as and when they come up as well. Okay. Skipping back over my chair's announcement. Are we happy to approve the notes of the previous meeting? It was only myself and Rosie that were there. So unless we've got anything we want to raise, then I think we can confirm the accuracy. Yes, Councillor Mundy.
Hi, yeah, I wasn't in the last meeting, but what I did notice is that there was a request to engage with local tenants unions around the selective licensing scheme. So I've got a contact from Acorn, the tenants union. They're very active in Oxford. I was just hoping I could forward that detail so that we could indeed engage with them.
Fab, I think that falls under, I think that might be a recommendation that we made. So I think there's a space for that separately in the agenda, and maybe be good to sort of look at it in regards to that. I think, yeah, report back on recommendations. So we'll be able to kind of more fully discuss that now, but thanks very much. If there's no other comments on kind of the accuracy, I think we'll approve those and move on. There are a couple of matters arising. Apologies. That's my mistake for misreading that bit. Minute 39, the landlord services transformation item has been deferred to the October meeting. On minute 43, the scrutiny officer highlighted required wording changes requiring governments in self-assessment to the landlord services manager. And minute 44, the landlord services manager circulated the anonymised raw data from the STAR survey and confirmation of the number of options that the survey respondents could choose. So that's just kind of some updates on some of the requests that we made and what happened to them. Okay, what I'm going to suggest now is that we take item 7, so the capital programs delegations, 8, the annual review of the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, and 9, which is the temporary accommodation demand and mitigations, as well as 10, which is the housing performance monitoring, next on the agenda, so that we can then do the admin bits, which are the work plan, the report back on recommendations, and the dates of future meetings to make the best possible use of officer time. So if everyone's happy to do that, fantastic. So next is the capital programs delegation. So I'm going to welcome Malcolm Peake to sort of introduce this, and obviously if anyone else wants to jump in, they are welcome to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. The report is a cabinet report that's going forward for approval to spend the pre-approved budget. So the budget was approved earlier in the year, and this is for the capital works programs to the housing stock. It's divided into 3 programs: internal, external, and communal. Having a split between them of that, and this is in order for us to maintain maintain the standard quality standards of the properties for this year, and we are also working on separately from this a 5-year program going forward, but this is a standalone for this year only. The programs, most of it will be significantly delivered by ODS is the intention. So it is the approval we're seeking today for the spend of that pre-approved budget and commencement of the award to ODS. If there's any other questions that anybody has on that.
So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask on this one? If you do, I'm going to suggest, and if you've got more than one, I'm going to suggest we bunch them together. So councillors, any questions? Oh, yep. Asma.
It's not a question, but just a comment that this sounds quite good, particularly the aspect where it kind of highlights that it's going to make the whole process more effective to make sure that the works are carried out. So yeah, just a small comment from me about that.
Any other questions? Or I'm not seeing any questions. I've got a couple of questions myself. So sorry, just bear with me 1 second. I'm just getting to the right points in my lot of scrolling happening. Some wonderfully thorough appendices. Right. Fantastic. Okay, so is there any sort of information on how it's likely that these things are going to be prioritized? So which properties will and which tenants will be chosen first? Is it kind of like most need? Does tenant vulnerability come into it?
So right, okay. So first of all, the programs are devised from a stock condition basis. We are currently undertaking a stock condition survey. So this program is developed on information we've received back from that as it goes. The actual condition survey won't be fully completed until March, and hence why it's a stopgap year in effect for the 5-year program. When we often get to site, we find that sometimes there's changes, so hence why there's a caveat for flexibility. We find that some people don't want works done, or works may have been covered under reactive, within the waiting period, if you like. So it's the program itself is condition based, so it's worst condition that we know of first, in effect. And in terms of the actual delivery of that, that is done jointly, but primarily by the contractor from an operational point of view as to how they can maximise. So it could be by street or by postcode, where certain types of work would be rolled out. So the planning of the actual delivery of works is done by ODS in effect through the operations teams.
And so just to follow up on that, so were you saying that it's also done not just on kind of the stock condition and what needs it most, but also where you find out which bits need it most, like the first ones you find out about that are in the worst conditions? It's kind of two.
Yes, so we obviously, from our asset data, we have life expectancy of component elements, roofs, etc. So the system tells us that roofs need replacing. So we have that. Obviously, component elements such as roofs, windows will will get sort of need replacing at different times. It's not actually a precise science. It could depend on weather conditions or facing north or south, that sort of thing. So ultimately, we validate the program that's produced, and then we have ODS in this case to go out and validate that, ensure that the works are needed, and then the program obviously adapts to that, and then they produce a schedule of delivery off the back of that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Stairs. Oh, you're on mute again. Sorry.
New to all this. I've had quite a few residents complaining of mold. Is that something that will come under this?
By default, yes, because obviously the works we carried out will when we're in a property, we will be taking more of a holistic view. So we're not just replacing a kitchen, for example. We would be looking at resolving those sort of associated issues as well, in bathrooms, kitchens, and so on. It's not just specifically. Obviously, the damp and mold is quite a big piece of work separately that's happening to develop our capacity to have more damp surveyors and improve on those. But overall, yes, it will overall improve the condition of the properties for residents.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Ruler, is this again kind of a follow-on question, or
like slightly separate?
Go ahead anyway.
Is that right? Sorry, thank you. Thanks. I was just going to ask whether there was any, as I understand it, I might be like misunderstanding, but to like undertake the program in this approach, it's the paper says that it will be like it's less inconvenient for tenants to not require multiple different occasions. But I just wondered if there's any risk to delays on parts of a program, like a project that they really feel is much more urgent than another, because we're now like building these things together in a more holistic or like all-in-one sort of approach. Just wondered if people may feel like the issue that they feel is really important could be delayed because we're now being a bit more extensive. But I'm getting the wrong message.
So as I said, this will be followed on by a much more detailed 5-year program. So this year is really about going out to achieve what we know we need to do. The concept that's there, Councillor, is obviously if we're putting a scaffold up to put a new roof on, we wouldn't want to take the scaffold down, then 6 months go back and do windows, for example. So the idea is that we would go and do the roof and the windows at the same time. Less inconvenience for the resident, less time taken off work to be there and that sort of thing. And obviously more practical, more effective delivery for our resourcing for our contractors.
And as part of the work, when you're sort of looking at we get kind of quite top line details in the report. Presumably you've got the data about how many of those are kitchens and maybe even which type of kitchens. Does that feed into any kind of like lessons learned about, I don't know, we installed loads of these kitchens in 2010, we thought they were going to last 20 years, loads of them turned out to be lasting 10 years, hang on a second. Is it kind of feeding into the future in that way?
It certainly does, in many ways, and that's a much bigger picture, obviously, in terms of stock management and condition management. And of course, yes, we're always looking to work with colleagues in ODS to learn, from each other and support each other in what we're doing, and certainly the specifications that we use. That's, I would say, this program particularly is a new way where previously we had work streams. So as I said, you just do a roofing program, then you do a window program. Or you have a kitchen program, for example. So what I'm trying to do now is pull those together so that we can go into the property, do the kitchen and the bathroom, do the electrical testing, do everything as much as we can that's feasible within one visit. And so in doing that gives us a much more holistic approach. It means we can plan works better. We can look at the specifications and so on. And the 5-year program that will be coming available that the team are working on at the moment, that obviously will go through the due process. That 5-year program will sort of obviously address that and look at the specifications that we want to use as well at the same time, and the decency and the requirements of that.
But will, I'm guessing I'm asking, will the stock management survey and also the work you're doing now feed into kind of some of that work later?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely, yes. I mean, it's an ongoing process constantly, because there are new things coming on the market, new innovations are coming through, especially within the energy. Obviously, we know that energy and sustainability is a fast changing market with new inventions and so on. So we're constantly looking at that and trying to upgrade accordingly through this program.
I guess the final question is, will the so I know they're sort of separately in the agenda a little bit as well, and generally the council's doing a lot of work on kind of energy efficiency, and I know part of that kind of stock taking work is looking at reassessing the EPC certificates, or assessing properties so that they've got an EPC rating, so that we can then work out what to do about other things. I guess that's another thing that would involve sort of testing in a resident's home. Is that work going to feed into this?
So yes, definitely the capital program needs to consider as much as possible. It's not always possible or feasible or affordable to go and refurbish every property we have all the sort of throughout the course. We do as much as we possibly can, but we do certainly try to incorporate again the philosophy that we need to do as much as we can, or that is needed possible in one visit, if you like, for this scheme. So yes, we would certainly be taking into consideration the energy and the EPC and that sort of thing at the time of the planning.
Oh, I guess more specifically, the question would be around EPC testing as well, whether that plays into it. Because I think I know that for a number of our properties, regardless of remedial work we might want to do, we don't necessarily know the EPC.
So the EPC is a separate, as you said, it's a separate survey that's carried out, and those are done. But because we have that data that's ongoing and reassessing all the time for changes, and when we do works in the property, we need to carry out a reassessment of the EPC to ensure that, because we would have upgraded it perhaps if we put new windows in, and if we do a roof, we'll probably do loft insulation. So the EPC will change by the mere fact of doing the work, and therefore the EPC gets reassessed at the end.
Ah, right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, just because I think I've had known it. Well, we don't necessarily know the current EPC rating of a property, so the reassessment, I guess there's also kind of for some properties almost as a separate thing. There's an assessment going on. But yeah. Any other questions or any recommendations? Not seeing any, in which case, thank you very much, Malcolm. You, I believe, may now leave if you would like. You are welcome to join us for the next hour and a half, but you're also welcome to regain the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so the next item that we're going to look at is the annual review of the Housing, Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy 2023 to 28. So I'd like to welcome Neris Perry. I understand that you're going to be introducing this one.
No, that'll be me.
I'm sorry. Richard, go ahead.
No worries. Thanks. So the report is the latest update on the Housing, Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy the council has 23 to 28. This is the completion of the first year, so a progress report, and then an update to the year 2 action plan that then is in the appendix of the report. Just to kind of summarize, so this strategy takes in the statutory homelessness and rough sleeping strategy that the council has to have, and then pairs it with we have the choice of having a housing strategy, brings the two together and seeks to kind of holistically look at how that all interplays and how we improve the housing and homelessness situation in the city. So the report kind of at length talks about the 5 priorities that we set out in the strategy and the achievements under that in the first year. So I'm happy to take any questions on that. I won't plan to go through that with you now. I think the other key thing, maybe just to highlight to panel, is then the emerging risks and challenges section later in the paper. I think that's really key. It has been a challenging year with these new challenges coming forward, and we really wanted to highlight those. So the 4 that's laid out in the paper is, linking to what we've just been talking about, competing demands for investment from the housing revenue account for different priorities. We've also got to ensure compliance with the consumer standards of the Social Housing Act and the investment required to do that. On the homelessness side, we've seen significant increases in homelessness in the city and the wider country over the last year, which is putting pressure on TA and cost overruns. Again, that's a paper that's next on the agenda. And then we also have challenges on our commissioning front on single homelessness and the alliance that we commission. We have always had a bold transformation agenda with our commission services that's being implemented as we speak, but in a context of very high cost inflation for providers, rising demand, and no extra budgets from local government to invest in that. It's a very difficult picture then to transform in. So we've also wanted to highlight that. Paired to that is the uncertainty around government funding. Current government funding ends next March, and we're awaiting, linked to the general election and spending review, what will come after that, and obviously that will have big impacts on our services into the years ahead. So the action plan has been updated, trying to speak to those emerging challenges and risks. But I think it's just important for members to be aware of the very challenging terrain in housing and homelessness in the city and the wider country that we're seeing at the moment. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Richard. I'm seeing a hand. If there are any other hands with some initial questions, it'd be helpful for me to get a sense of how many we might have. Not seeing any others. So Seema, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Richard, for that summary. Mine is part comment, part question. In the Year 2 Strategy Action Plan, there's a section under the 33rd paragraph that says that you've requested approval to make to revise the plan throughout the year. Comment is that that's quite good in order for flexibility and stuff, but I just wanted to ask whether there's going to be any checks or kind of scrutiny with the short-term kind of revisions. It says that there's going to be routine monitoring internally with group officers and stuff, but I just wanted to ask whether that's enough or whether there's amendments that need more kind of checks before the flexible kind of revisions are made.
Happy to come back. So that's a recommendation to Cabinet that they will need to make a decision on next week. We've asked for that ability because obviously, as we just outlined, it's a changing world, the housing and homelessness picture, and we need to make sure the action plan can respond to those challenges. The power, I think, as it's drafted in the report, it is in consultation with the lead member for housing. So she will be the democratic link there to ensure that any officer changes that we put forward to the action plan this year do have that oversight. And then within the governance of this strategy, everything comes back annually to Cabinet and Council and through scrutiny, which we're doing tonight, so that any changes can be scrutinised at least on an annual basis. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Did that answer your question? Rosie.
Thank you. Sorry for not finding my question earlier, but yeah, thank you, and I really appreciate the challenges being highlighted here, and yeah, they're certainly like very real, and it's a really tricky landscape that we're in, quite clearly, especially in Oxford. I just wondered in particular, like one of our approaches that underpins quite a lot of this is how we are interpreting the government's advice on getting this right now, not first homes, first homes, that's right, or the proportion of how we are and what we are understanding as affordable homes or not. And I just wondered, like, to what extent that what that timeline looked like in terms of getting a sense of whether we're ploughing ahead, we're going to be able to plough ahead as planned, and recognizing we may have a new government or not, which may change things. But I really appreciate some reflections on that in terms of that being quite a key underpinning. And I also just wondered whether I'm misunderstanding the like the action plan table at the end. There's like an indication that there's a RAG rating where we could see how we're meeting each of the like current items in the action plan, or at least there's a key for it, a RAG rating. But I don't know if we were expecting to see one, but that would have been really helpful, I think, as well, along each of the items to be able to get that red, green, amber, as well as the actions. But I might be misreading, but just wanted to highlight that. Looked like that would be really.
So on the second, sorry, do you want to come back?
Yeah, so I was just nodding to say go ahead.
Sorry, I forget that I'm going to go for the chair. Sorry about that. On the second question, so I'll be completely honest, you've been sent the wrong template. This is the officer template rather than the member one. Really, we should have, because it's the forward action plan for the year, not the last year. This will be filled in as the year goes on, and it will be ragged as we do the updates. But I'm happy to maybe take the feedback away that when we do this next year, to bring the version of that from the year before. Does that make sense? So that's why that confusion was there. On the first question, I'm looking at Neris. I don't know. I'm not a planner, so I'm going to struggle with that one. I don't know, Neris, do you any more than that than me?
I think, sorry, Councillor Diggins, if I can come in. I think we're going to need to take it away, Councillor Roll, to just get sort of a bit of a kind of specialist kind of comment really from somebody like Dave Scholes, who leads on the affordable supply side. I wouldn't want to say that I have a sense of something, and I'm a bit nervous about saying slightly the wrong thing here. So can we take that away as a question, Alice, and come back and confirm precisely? Yeah.
Thank you both. Any other questions or comments? I've got a few questions. So one of them, and I always, with reports like this, I know they're quite top level and probably therefore cover lots of things, and I might be asking about something that really falls under something else. So do say if that's the case. Now let me just work out where it was. Oh yes. So in paragraph 15, it talks about kind of housing for net zero housing future, and it might be part of this is the kind of the lack of the previous RAG rated one, but it talks about kind of the social media and marketing campaign for the HUG2 funding, and how, you know, I know that I'm a bit unclear as to how that funding gets mediated, whether it's through us or the government, and do we know how many people in Oxford has taken it up or applied for a grant, or is that not information we'd have?
Shall I come in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the HUG2 funding is something that we hold ourselves, and I think it's sort of disseminated to us from the county. How much have we spent? I think again it'll be a question I'm going to have to take away. Yeah, it's sort of held within another team, so I think we need to double check that again.
Absolutely, that's, you know, completely fine. And the other thing is, and so in the report, it's kind of got obviously like a tale of two things. It's got the increase in temporary accommodation coupled with actually what looks like kind of some positive noises around housing first. And I think let me just double check that I'm not saying things or maybe I thought I read something about how the length of stays in temporary accommodation, we are seeing those going down, that's obviously nowhere near it, because we're facing an exponential rise in temporary accommodation pressures. But actually, what does the interplay between those two different things look like? And is part of the problem, I guess, that we can't escalate housing fast enough to help really mitigate much at all against the temporary accommodation challenge.
So, do you want me to come back on that? And then Kieran may also want to come in because he covers TA. So what you're referencing there, Councillor Diggins, is the performance report later on in the agenda. That's where all that.
Apologies.
No, don't worry. I'm happy to answer it now. So we have seen, while we've seen a large increase in TA occupancy, we've seen a decrease as a percentage terms in length of stay, and that's because as officers, as we face such huge demand, there's only limited kind of levers to try to lower use, and that is to move people on more quickly. So as we focused on faster move on into both the social and private sectors to decrease the overall demand for TA stock, that's actually lowered the length of stay, which is a positive kind of impact of that. So there's been a huge amount of concerted effort over the last kind of 12 to 24 months. People in temporary accommodation now, they are allocated move on officers to plan for their move on, to get them out quicker, to move them on to more successful into permanent accommodation. In the next report on temporary accommodation, we talk a bit more about how we're moving people on more quickly, and Kieran's team has been able to source more private rented sector accommodation in the city and in Oxfordshire to offer as permanent accommodation, but also we are having to prioritise some of our social lets to move people on more quickly from temporary accommodation. In regards to the linkages then with Housing First, so we obviously, as the paper says, we've increased our Housing First stock over the last few years. That principally is aimed at rough sleepers and moving people off the street and on from supported accommodation if they were previously rough sleeping. There will be some people in temporary accommodation who have experienced rough sleeping, but they're slightly different client groups. So that's why, while that's positive and it all overall builds a picture of homelessness, there isn't too many direct links between moving on from TA to Housing First, if that makes sense. I don't know if, Kieran, you want to add anything to that?
No, there's nothing I can add at this stage. That covered pretty much most of what I was going to say. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Okay, so I think so the most of the Housing First about ending rough sleeping, temporary accommodation, most of that is evictions from the private sector. Is that still the picture?
Family and friend evictions. It says in the next paper around evictions from home office accommodation as well.
Yes,
with the yeah.
No, exactly. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And then I think I have to say, this is thank you to Alice, that we last year considered the strategy, and I've been helpfully reminded that we made a recommendation that the council works with Oxplace to consider how it might move towards having a higher percentage of new homes let at the social rent level rather than a simple majority, which I guess feeds into what Rosie was talking about earlier, and it might be another one you need to take away. But it will be interesting to get kind of we had sort of an in part agreement, and part of that said that planners are currently considering responses to the new local plan 2040 preferred options consultation and have undertaken recent work on housing viability. This new plan will set out future requirements for the level of social rented accommodation required for all new development schemes. So I guess it'd be helpful to kind of have an account of kind of what happened there and whether there's any updates you could give us on that, sort of building on what Rosie said earlier. But if you need to take that one away, then that's fine.
I'll just come in very quickly. Richard, you can add. So the local plan is obviously being considered at the moment. So it's under the it's with the inspector right now. So I guess we can't really comment on how that will completely land. But the affordable supply percentages are 40% in the new local plan. So we will just have to wait and see how that kind of plays through the inspection.
This was, I mean, that's my, I think this question was more about when we've got affordable housing, the definition of affordable housing and how much of, and maybe it is also 40%, but how much of that affordable housing will be social rent, for example, as opposed to other definitions of affordability?
Yes. I don't want to get this wrong, but there is a very defined percentage, Richard. I don't know if you know it off the top of your head, but there's a percentage definition of social rent, then of affordable, and there is a viability question then around what those I think products, as they call them, which is how much is shared ownership, etc., etc. And there is a viability question for the company in terms of how it can make all of that add up, to deliver a scheme that is successful. Again, I don't want to say quite the wrong thing. I think it's 40% of the 50% has to be social rent, but I think I need to just double check that as well.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, well, maybe we can take that one offline as well. Let me find where I am. Too many tabs open. And there are also some sort of references to other strategies within the strategy. So there's one on the asset management strategy. Is that something, do you know kind of what the timescales are, and would it be something that might come before that we might be able to look at as a panel when the final draft's ready?
Yes, shall I come in on that, Councillor
Yeah.
Diggins? So the asset management strategy work is sort of very much underway at the moment. Malcolm will have touched a little bit on some of that in his paper. The answer is absolutely. In good time, whether it's via this panel or via sort of broader member workshops, we will absolutely want to be kind of bringing members into that conversation around both the asset management strategy, but also the 5-year capital programs. And actually, we were just discussing this morning how we best do that. I'm going to say that the sort of timescale around it is to hit a sort of cabinet around December. Where we'd be bringing together all of that work as part really of budget setting, because it aligns very much to the HRA's business plan, which of course is part of the budget setting process. So, we're expecting to sort of bring a bundle nearly of strategies that speak to each other together within that budget setting process. So December is sort of where we're aiming for. How we consult members is, I think, inevitably those will come via this panel as they head into any kind of form of cabinet. But I think we would also probably like to have a broader conversation with members about setting the capital programs and asset management strategy. And of course, we'd also be wanting to have those conversations with our tenants directly about what their priorities are and what their, so that they can feed into that work with us over this kind of coming period. And that work has actually started. Some of that work has started today. We sent surveys out to all our residents today, asking them about their priorities and what they want to see in their homes and in their neighbourhoods to help us start to form and shape that asset management strategy. So very much underway. I'm very pleased to be able to kind of say that, and then we'll absolutely come back. We'll come back to you probably in several different ways.
Fantastic. Is it a similar picture for the HRA business plan? Is that kind of, or is that does that sit quite separately?
They are very, very interlinked. In due course, the HRA's business plan's narrative, the asset management strategy forms part of that narrative. It sets out, the HRA is concerned about how it looks after its stock, how it will do this, how it will do that within that kind of landlord function. So the asset management strategy will probably form part or a chapter of the HRA's business plan, and they very, very much speak to each other. So this is why we're trying to align them really to the budget process, because obviously the HRA is a budget in its own right and has to kind of follow that kind of that kind of process. so which is why we're trying to align the asset management work in with it, so that they can kind of go together, because they are levers that speak to each other. So and how much I can spend on my asset management is dictated by the business plan, much money there's in the business plan. So
thank you, that's really helpful. And then a couple of other ones. Just, I think there are some references in the action plan to officers that no longer work at the council, potentially. So just to flag that, I assume that's being updated. The wrong version may have played into that.
The problem is we have to draft these papers well in advance of the meetings, and people have left in between. So, but yeah, we were very aware of that. We will update that.
Fantastic, thank you. And I wonder, because it would be interesting, I think, to see that, comparison between 2023 and 24. I don't know if maybe by the time of our next meeting it would be a little bit late, but would it be possible to get a bit of a picture of what the two plans look like, how much similarity there is, what the picture was at the end of last year, or would you need to sort of probably have it in front of you to do that?
Possibly. That'd probably be a conversation for me and Tom to pick up in regards to what I haven't actually seen the latest version from last year, and I don't know how much if it's in a kind of in a state that can be shared. So I'm happy to pick that up with Tom, and maybe send that. We could maybe share that in the future. Yeah, I don't know, Tom. I don't know if you've had sight of it, and if that's something that can be shared.
I think we'd have to look at it together, Richard. I'm sure we can share something. It's just making sure it's in the correct format so it makes sense. So
yeah, this is a bit of a symptom of Amy having wrote this report and did all the work, and she's not in this meeting. So we'll take that offline, and we can see what we can do potentially.
Fantastic, thank you both. Yeah, that would be really helpful. I might suggest that as a bit of a recommendation, because I think that would be quite helpful to just kind of see, and then we can also get a sense. It would help sort of for 24, 25 into 25, 26 to kind of get sort of like a look what, as a point of comparison between different years as well, if possible. So brilliant. If there are no other questions or comment. Oh, sorry, Alice. Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to check on that last one. Did you want it as a formal recommendation to Cabinet, or are you wanting to just pick it up as a piece of work to share with the panel outside the meeting?
Yeah, maybe just informal is fine. It doesn't need to be a formal recommendation to Cabinet. And then we are looking at just to say thank you to both of you, and then we're going to move on to the temporary accommodation demand and mitigations. So welcome to Nerys, Richard, Kieran. I'm happy for you to kind of introduce it as you would like, and for many of you to share the mic if you would like to as well. So hand over to you.
Thanks. So I'll kick off, and then I might just hand over to Kieran just to go through some of the actual mitigations in the paper. So just in regards to the overall picture, so this paper to Cabinet sets out basically the council's response to rapidly rising homelessness in the city, which is then leading through to what we've just been discussing, increased TA use, which is then leading to significant financial risk to the council with overspends. So as well as updating on that picture, it's very much setting out a number of mitigations that we are now taking to try to bring down TA use in the months and years ahead. In regards to kind of the homelessness situation, the paper kind of outlines that we've seen a 90% increase in the number of homelessness duties that we accept at the council over the last 2 years, which has then led to a 170% increase in a TA placement rate that we're currently experiencing, which is a huge, pretty unprecedented increase over the last 2 years. That in turn has led to an increase in the number in temporary accommodation from 108 2 years ago to 246 living in temporary accommodation today. we historically, at least over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, have always used our own stock to house people in temporary accommodation, owned by both the General Fund and the HRA. But these kind of unprecedented increases in TA demand has meant that we've had to increasingly use hotels in the city and in the wider county. So from 2 years ago, where we only had 2 households in hotel accommodation, we're now up to 123, as the paper outlined. So it shows you that the real pressure, which then add in, both the impact on those people, but also the cost then on the council to sustain people in that hotel accommodation. Paper talks about a number of drivers of why that is. We're seeing higher private rented sector evictions, more family and friend presentations of people who are evicted from the family or friends' homes, a very large increase in Home Office evictions that then the City Council has to step in and potentially house those people, and also an increase in domestic abuse presentations as well. We think certainly on the PRS and family friend eviction side, that is stemming from cost of living crisis, rising rents, interest rates, with landlords moving out of the market, etc. And overall, we are seeing an increase in priority need, which is the legal definition of who we have to then house in interim temporary accommodation. The only other kind of points I would just emphasise before I pass on to Kieran is what is also a kind of a new trend is although family cases have gone up, they have now peaked and are coming down again in temporary accommodation. This is largely singles that we are keeping housed in TA, and we are struggling with that because we just don't have the housing stock and access to housing stock to move on singles. We mainly we've not historically built many one-bedroom social housing over many decades, and that is a real challenge now to where we put all these people we have legal duties to rehouse when they're single household families. The trends that we are seeing are also shared certainly across the southeast of England in urban authorities. Most of all of our district neighbours are reporting similar trends, and really it seems to be a national kind of picture of rising homelessness that has been covered in the media. And the final point I'll just make is the paper does outline then the financial risk this poses to the council, which is considerable. To house these number of people in hotel accommodation is obviously a huge cost to the council because housing benefit only covers a small portion of those costs. The paper outlines that there's currently a £2.8 million annual overspend projected at present, and if trends continue within 6 months, that will be up to £3.2 million overspend annually. So that is why we've taken a number of mitigations as outlined in the paper to try to bring that down. If okay, I will just hand over to Kieran now just to summarise some of those mitigations, and then happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Richard. I'll speak to some of the mitigations. So the report has quite a lot of detail on sort of the mitigations and the actions we've already taken to increase our temporary accommodation supply. So what we've done is we've transferred 25 units of council-owned stock to be used as temporary accommodation to increase the amount of stock we have within temporary accommodation, reducing the demand on sort of hotel capacity and hotel residents in hotel. Another mitigation we've taken to sort of reduce demand on temporary accommodation, ultimately increase the supply of temporary accommodation, is establishing a private sector leasing scheme, which is where we lease private rented properties from landlords off the market and use that accommodation to provide temporary accommodation to residents who are owed duty by the council. As the paper outlines, we're looking to secure up to 60 units by the end of 2024. So far, we've been successful in securing 22 units, and we're currently running a program to procure more in that sector. So that's much needed. And then the final thing, just to quickly go through in terms of the mitigations, which the report details, is the framework for emergency temporary accommodation. So as Richard sort of said, we have quite a lot of reliance on hotel accommodation at the moment. So one of the things we are going to do is establish a framework for how we procure and sort of utilize hotel accommodation and emergency accommodation to make sure it's in line with sort of procurement regulations and sort of the temporary accommodation provision we require. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions on that There's further detail in the report.
Thank you very much to both of you. I'm seeing a question from Anne. Do you want to come in?
I'm just asking so at the moment we've got two what used to be elderly housing units in Littlemore, which now aren't used for elderly. Is that so? One's in Alice Smith Square, one's in Eastern Avenue. Is that going to continue to be used in that way, or will it go back to elderly housing?
Yeah. Happy for you to come in.
Yeah, so Alice Smith and Eastern Avenue are two of our temporary accommodation sites at the moment. So they've been used for just maybe 5 to 10 years, I think it is, before my time. But the current plan, just because of these levels of demand, is to continue to use those two sites. And as the paper outlines, we'll be increasing the number of sites that we operate as temporary accommodation throughout the city and probably in the wider county over the months and years ahead due to the rise in demand. In regards to certainly Eastern, I know there is a long-term view to redevelop those sites eventually, but for the foreseeable future, the plan is for TA.
Yeah, I mean, how well thought out are these sites? Because particularly for residents that are reporting to me, are finding this very difficult to have these units within a residential area, so I've got residents reporting afraid to go out of their houses at night. Taxis won't go there in the evening. So whilst obviously the homeless need to be looked after, there's a concern that when it's brought into the centre of a residential area like this, it's actually creating then another problem.
So on all of our TA sites, we work very closely, the housing team, with our antisocial behaviour colleagues. And I know there's been recent issues at Eastern, and we're working very closely with it at the moment to make sure that we're using all the powers the council has to ensure good management of those sites. So I'm not an expert at the different measures that the antisocial behaviour team, I don't know, someone might be able to.
I mean, certainly Alice Smith Square, I've got some ladies saying they're afraid to go outside of the houses in the daytime. So I think it is an issue that we need to be aware of.
I think I appreciate you might be asking follow-ups. Can I just ask that we go kind of direct things a little bit more through me, just so we can make sure that it's
sure.
The best way. Thank you. And just let Richard finish his answer.
Yeah, so we're very aware of the situation, and we share the concerns of local residents. We need to ensure that these sites are well managed, and anyone who's in breach of their licenses at those sites, that we follow all the correct procedures. Like I said, we're working with our antisocial behaviour colleagues. Where people breach their license, they will get warnings. Ultimately, they may lose their licenses if they continue to breach what's acceptable behaviours. At the same time, we are taking steps within the housing team to ensure that as we place at sites, that we get those mixes right. We do have to house people with certain support needs and other behaviours that might cause issues to other neighbours. So it's about ensuring that we put those people dispersed and in the best place we can. But I would emphasise that it's a very challenging position the council's under. We're placing up to about 10 households a week into temporary accommodation, and therefore we do need to find these sites, and often they do bring considerable challenges to manage them.
Okay, so if I get concerns, do I come to you with those? Yeah, okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, just to make sure that and also I think if we can, that's really sort of helpful insight. But in terms of casework, if we try and sort of take that a little bit more offline, because otherwise it means that
sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Asma.
Thanks, Lizzie and Richard. Mine is a bit of a crossover question between this and the kind of table that's in agenda item 10. I hope that's okay. And it's just a point of clarification that I just wanted to ask. In the table in agenda item 10, it says that the kind of people who are rough sleeping and aren't offered accommodation are mostly people who are rough sleeping long term. And in the TA, it says that some of the kind of reason why the demand has gone so high is people who've been evicted from home office accommodation. And I just wanted to ask, is if those people continue to experience a homelessness, will they kind of fall into the long-term rough sleepers who then kind of fall into that kind of legal hole where they won't be offered TA going forward? Sorry, I hope that's okay for me to ask under this section here.
I'm conscious of mine talking a lot. Kieran, do you want to answer that one, or if not, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think I'll answer the best I can, and if there's any questions on top of that, I'm more than happy to respond to. I think it's sort of the demand on temporary accommodation is from residents who are owed sort of the legal duty to provide temporary accommodation, and that's sort of based upon individual applications, and they're assessed sort of individually. So, for example, you might have somebody who is not rough sleeping but might be being evicted. They may be entitled to the provision of emergency housing as set out in the Housing Act, while there may be individuals who unfortunately are becoming homeless but may not hit that threshold upon becoming homeless. Therefore, we wouldn't intervene legally because of the statutory duty, and therefore may become, unfortunately, more rough sleeping longer term. And obviously, there's lots of things. This when somebody's rough sleeping, then obviously there's other provisions out there to support them. The longer somebody's rough sleeping, they may be able to access different services. For example, within the rough sleeping pathways or the alliance, which then can feed into the wider projects such as Housing First. And also, when somebody is sort of rough sleeping or as presented with an individual application, it's assessed on their own sort of individual circumstances. So it can be sort of quite difficult to give sort of a broader overview, but that might hope that answers the question why some people who were evicted from hotel accommodation would go straight into temporary accommodation, while some others might not and might rough sleep, because it's based on the individual application and what statutory responsibility the authority holds of that individual.
Yeah.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thanks, Kieran.
And Nerith.
Okay, Chair, I was just going to add, sometimes for cases where we have very long-term rough sleepers, it's usually a sort of reflection also of a complexity of need that sometimes takes a really long time, for somebody to kind of come in to accommodation. That's not to say that we don't have outreach teams that are engaging on a daily basis, but it can be a long process in some cases. So what we see in terms of street homelessness, when we refer to long-term rough sleepers, it does take us some time sometimes to bring them in, and also to have the right kind of accommodation for them, where they have the best chance of kind of recovering from the trauma of homelessness, which is usually incredibly profound and complex in nature. So I just wanted to I hope that's a helpful sort of addition.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. I've got a couple of questions myself. I mean, one of them is just, and this is probably just the nature of the problem, but some of the mitigations, obviously the reason that they're sort of mitigations that you haven't necessarily taken earlier, they look like they might have impacts on other aspects of service. And I wonder kind of what consideration has been made to kind of the other, I guess, not that I'm an economist, but externalities to, for example, redesignating existing social housing stock, and how that might impact on other aspects of kind of housing need and homelessness. And I know predicting the interplay between those things is probably near impossible, but I wonder what consideration had been given to sort of the interplay between, those different aspects of the council's housing provision.
Happy to come in on that one. So all of the sites that we have in mind, and we're currently kind of doing the assessments on if that, they're viable to go forward, are all units that will be waiting redevelopment soon anyway. So the idea is we will have to decant them in the next few years, whatever happens, and move those people onto different accommodation. So if we just move that forward maybe a few years, do it now, we can then use the stock ahead of redevelopment for temporary accommodation use. So some of that is just general needs accommodation that's due to be demolished fairly soon anyway. And then other forms of accommodation are over 55s accommodation. There was a review carried out a few years ago that suggests that over 55 accommodation is of relatively lower demand in the city compared to other forms of accommodation. And we do certainly find that when we have voids up for over 55s accommodation, sometimes we only have a handful of bids, whereas obviously we're having hundreds of bids for social housing. So the idea is that potentially if we use some of those sites, we can support residents to move to other over 55 sites where there is lower demand, and then we can use those sites ahead of redevelopment for use to meet these TA demands for a period of time. It's quite well established within the sector. A lot of other local authorities are doing this at the moment, and we do think that is one of the options going forward to increase the supply and lower hotel use, which is obviously unacceptable for people to live in for long periods of time.
And I guess, yeah, I thought I was going to sort of ask about lessons learned from other councils, but I guess on that particular point, has there been anything that seeing those other councils doing it, I guess, particularly around communications and sort of supporting people to build new communities and any other kind of things that maybe weren't, anything that you've kind of seen, or whether those conversations are planned to be had instead?
So I don't actually work on the landlord services side myself, but we are experienced in doing this in the past. The current plan is if we move forward with this, we will get some dedicated decant officer capacity to just work with local residents to support them. I can't do this off the top of my head, but there is a number of statutory measures that also step in. So we have to consult with them. We will have to pay compensation because we're asking them to move to different accommodation. And we would follow best practice both from our own experience and elsewhere, where we make sure that we support everyone to feel like they're moving somewhere where they want to move, and to alternative accommodation, either in our own stock or in other social housing provider stock to facilitate those moves. So we're in the early days of those plans, but they're already what is dominating those conversations to make sure that we do this in the best way possible.
And I guess off the back of that, I guess there's some accompanying costs and maybe some significant accompanying costs. Are those kind of calculations ongoing, not yet sort of finalised?
Calculations ongoing, but they pale into insignificance compared to hotel costs. We're paying about £100 to £80 to £100 a night on hotel rooms. So you can imagine, when we're maybe talking about 30 extra units every night, that's why it soon goes into the millions. These overspends, and to get extra temporary accommodation in will cause so much cost avoidance that it adds up quite easily. But the details of that we are currently working through, and yeah.
And I guess sort of on another point, sorry, oh no, the thought has totally left my brain. It was on a similar point. Oh well, maybe it'll come back to me in a moment. I guess on a slightly different, sorry, Neris, come in.
I wonder, Councillor Diggins, if it was your former point, which was I think also the kind of this very fine balance that we have to manage when we're moving permanent stock into sort of temporary accommodation, sort of beyond the de-designation piece that Richard's just talked about. Kieran mentioned that we've already moved a number of sort of permanent units across to be used as for temp for a while. I mean, it is a very fine balance that we monitor on a sort of monthly basis, just to ensure that we're not tipping, because for every unit we move from permanent stock, that's a permanent move on unit that would have obviously gone through the register for a permanent home. So it is a fine balance, but the pressure and the financial implications for the councils are so acute that we are doing that within this crisis period at the moment to try and manage, where we see where that can sort of provide an answer in the short term. And then there are always options for us, of course, if the family settle within that unit on a temporary basis, we can always switch it back to being permanent. So there is some, we have got some flexibilities, and we do try and kind of keep a very, very close eye on that, because switching it all to temp isn't an answer either. But I think it's just a reflection of the situation we're in.
And actually that wasn't my point, but that was I'd forgotten about that. So thank you. That's really helpful. The point I was going to ask was about, I guess, timescales, because a lot of this sounds like it's going to take quite a long time if there's an involvement. Obviously, there's all the prep work that needs to be done that's still ongoing. Then there would be a statutory consultation phase. What's the kind of timelines for some of these different options actually coming onto the playing field to be
so shall I give that a go, and Kieran, you can fill any of the gaps. So some of the mitigations have already been deployed. So a number of transfers from the HRA have already been made. In regards to the increase in the prevention activity as outlined in the paper, all the work around increasing supply for move on, that is all pretty much delivered now, and it's just about kind of monitoring that and ensuring we keep that up. In regards to the stock side, so Kieran's team and him have done a huge amount of work to deliver these PSL private sector leasing schemes, and delivered all, I think, what did you say, Kieran, 23 or something, was it?
Yeah, currently, and the report it says 22, but we've done a few more now, so we're up to 27 at the moment.
Okay. And we'll be targeting then to get to 60 by the end of the year, and then review things. In regards to the decant work, yes, that is a longer term thing, probably more likely 24 months. But we are having, this is both for our stock and for registered provider stock as well. And there is a potential to have maybe some of the RP units we're talking about could come earlier. But if we kind of reach outline agreements with RPs, that will be something that we can share with panel in the future. Have I forgotten any ones, Kieran? I'm trying to think.
Nothing jumping out to me, to be honest with you.
That was really helpful, thank you. I think that's all of my questions. Unless anyone else has got any questions or comments on that one. No. So thank you all very much for that. Kieran, thank you so much for all of your insight, and you may now reclaim the rest of your evening. So thank you. And then finally, we are moving on to the housing performance monitoring. So thank you to Neris, Richard, and Tom. Happy for you to introduce, or for us to launch straight into discussion, whichever you prefer.
I think we'll be happy to just take questions. I think the report largely speaks for itself.
Yes, I think probably the most straightforward of the reports that we receive. So does anyone have any questions? We are now looking at the very helpfully rag-rated table at the bottom. Not seeing any. I have a couple. I think we've probably sounded out all of the TA questions. And I guess, yeah, so on the prevention duty outcomes, I guess this is actually one I probably should have asked in the previous report as well. Again, this strikes me, and I may be wrong, but it strikes me as one that's also got a bit of an interplay with the temporary accommodation, partly in terms of staff time, but also difficulties with the prevention if a prevention falls through, which ends up in an eviction, presumably that also leads to another house needing to be rehomed in temporary accommodation. So I wondered if you could tell me, I guess it's quite an open-ended question, but tell me a bit more about that. I guess, is it partly, officer time? What else is going, or is it difficulty in, actually carrying out the prevention?
It's both. Exactly. So, as demand has gone up and up, staff time is increasingly had to focus on the later stages of homelessness. So the immediate period before homelessness and when homelessness occurs. Obviously the statutory kind of framework kind of forces officers to have to focus on that core bit, and obviously that's understandable. People are losing their homes, and it just means that we've whereas we were before trying to focus upstream, it becomes increasingly difficult as that demand goes through the roof. Having said that, though, it is also then of some trying to work to deliver those prevention outcomes. They have fewer they have fewer options to be able to deliver those outcomes. So, for example, we did a lot of work in the past, and we still do, and have some success, but with like landlord mediation, talking to the landlord about keeping tenants to stay in their property. But that gets increasingly difficult when the landlords are putting up the rents and they're saying, I need to put up the rent because of interest rates, and there's no negotiation there, and then the eviction proceeds, or even sourcing alternative accommodation for people to move to when they're getting evicted. We're struggling increasingly in Oxford just to find accommodation within the local housing allowance that people can afford to move ahead of an eviction to prevent them. Having said all of that, which is quite a difficult picture, and you can see that in the stats for last year, as outlined in the previous paper, we are investing in our prevention teams this year, and it's very early days, but I think, certainly in regards to caseloads, they are coming down at the moment as we get more staff in, and that is then creating more opportunities to try to keep people in their homes. It's a very difficult terrain, as I've just outlined, but there are some options still out there. We've had some real good success recently with the Oxford Unmet Need homes that are being built in the surrounding districts, making sure that homeless and risk of homeless clients are bidding for those properties in places like Abingdon, and we've had real success then at getting people moved and happy in an affordable home in the future. And across the board, we're having staff trying any innovative ways with their reduced caseloads to try to keep people in their homes or move quickly if they are going to lose them. And like I said, early days, but it's looking a bit better in the first 3 months of this year. So difficult picture, but we are trying to get that number back up, that percentage. Oh, Chair, I think you're on mute.
I was just saying thank you. Yes, it's a really, really difficult picture. Yes, Tom, is it Tom? Sorry.
It is Tom, yeah. So I just add that, in the last quarter, just let's go on to what Richard was saying there, we've improved our performance. So it's about 62% prevention, successful prevention outcomes. So what Richard's referring to there about all the money being spent and the extra staff resourcing is making a difference. And hopefully we'll see that continue.
That's really reassuring to hear. I guess actually, maybe we hadn't I've got maybe another question about sort of rough sleeping, and particularly in relation to sort of the impact of the evictions from the hotel. I guess my confusion is exactly what's happened. Have they been granted asylum and then the Home Office has just kicked them out? Wow. Okay.
Yes. So obviously we have a large asylum hotel run by the Home Office in the city. I can't remember the exact terminology, but they've in the last 6 months they've done a sped up decision making process. So they're making asylum decisions for the people living at the hotel, and then basically after a short period of notice they then just evict them. Basically their only choice then is to present to the local authority to present as homeless. We have to apply the same legal tests that we do with everyone in that circumstance. So everyone who comes to us who's been evicted from the Home Office accommodation, we do the statutory prevention and relief work. Everyone gets a personal housing plan, access to support, and we will try to help them find PRS accommodation, etc. But there is a separate test around priority need. If someone then gets provided interim accommodation, so some people we will house them in TA who've come out of the Home Office accommodation, and that's been part of this picture of growing pressure on TA use, and in particular for singles, because it's all single adults in the Home Office hotel. But also it is causing rough sleeping pressure, because while we will work with everyone coming out of the hotel and support them, we do not provide interim accommodation to people who aren't priority need, and therefore they will potentially end up rough sleeping, and then it will be our commission services potentially that then pick them up with outreach, somewhere safe to stay, etc. Yeah.
Right. I guess that does sort of answer. That was sort of what I read into it, but I was just, yeah, shocking. I guess there's no sort of, that hasn't has that played into any of the additional relief money that the government's granted, or is that being for separate pressures, or sort of all bundled into one?
So we receive, I don't know what it's called, something like the asylum dispersal grant or something along those terms. We do receive that money. Last year when they first established the hotel, we received a reasonably generous, I can't remember the exact amounts, Neris, do you? I don't want to say anything that's wrong, but we received a sizable grant last year that we used to provide some specialist officer time around homelessness to help those residents, those people, the citizens coming out of the hotel. But we also then did some commission services as well to support people in the hotel. We were informed this year that it's one-off funding for new rooms. So because the hotel is already in the city now, we won't receive any further funding for that hotel. You just get 1 year's worth of funding, and then that's that. So the only additional funding we received this year from the Home Office was for any new accommodation they've sourced elsewhere in the city, which was a small number and really hardly anything to fund any services.
And has the council considered, I mean, I guess now there's, you can't really make representations to the government, but is that something that's being sort of considered and ongoing, particularly if whatever happens on Thursday into Friday?
Yeah, for example, I attended a meeting with the chief executive and representatives from ministers at the Home Office to make this point around the need for support and the suitability of the hotel, for example, in the city, etc. But yeah, we haven't seen any significant policy changes since then.
Thank you. I guess, yeah, just don't really know what to say. It's just pretty bleak. So on sort of a totally different note, I think we might have had this conversation before, and it's about how you rag rate. So this is really kind of complete changing tone of the EPC stock, because I still don't think it really makes any sense. I don't like, it's green. Well, it makes more sense than last time, I think, but I'm still like getting my head around what green means. It's a percentage of council-owned housing stock that has an EPC rating below C. Does that mean A or B or C? What does that mean?
Neris, do you want to try me?
Yeah, Chair, I will try. Yeah, this I think this focuses us all in different ways. So, the target for last year was to have 30% of the stock, no more than 30% of the stock with an EPCC rating. So we overachieved last year because we have 25% of the stock only has an EPCC rating, hence why it's flagged green. So we've sort of done quite well in terms of progress. That doesn't mean to say that's the full picture. So as we've discussed in previous reports, not all of the stock has an EPCC certificate, and we are slowly working our way through a series of surveys in order to establish a complete picture of the stock. So I think it says in the narrative there that 13% of our stock still doesn't have that certificate. So there's a sort of a slight unknown amongst that sort of 25% figure. But we are making good progress. I think last year we did 500 surveys on the stock. So we you know, the picture is becoming clearer and clearer on the state of the stock. And I'll just say, just a quick comment on that actually, is one of the things that we're finding, in fact, as we try to deliver this social housing decarb fund project, is one of the challenges that we're coming up against in that very specific program, because we have to survey all of those 316 units, is that we are finding that far more of them have got an EPCC rating than we originally thought. So it's a sort of indication that some of our stock is actually performing slightly better than we had originally thought, which is good news overall. It's slightly challenging for the SHDF project because actually we've got a very quick timetable on that one, and we need to deliver 316 homes quickly, and we're finding some that are therefore not eligible because they're already got a C rating. I'd rather have that problem, I think, than a different problem overall. But it's a slight challenge within the delivery of the programme. So I'll pause there, Councillor Dickens. I'm wondering if that has clarified for you.
Yeah, I think it is. I guess so. This is 23.6% of properties for which we have an EPC certificate are below C. So D, E, F, etc.
But that was for the year before last year. That was 22, 23, 22, whatever it was. It's 25, the end of the last financial year.
So it's gone up. So that we've found more properties with worse EPCs out of that unknown stock.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And that sort of makes sense because presumably a lot of the ones, I'm thinking of some in my ward that we don't have certificates for, are the ones that are harder to, like the kind of slightly, that they're not the straightforward council properties. That makes sense. And I guess the only other kind of comment really is that I feel like, I mean, I appreciate it's gone down slightly, but I feel like we had the same conversation, or we're very regularly having the same conversation about relet time. And I wonder, you know, I can see things are saying they're going to be improved, but I wonder if there was any other story going on there, Neris.
Yes, so I can appreciate that. It's a frustration. The measures that are described in the narrative are relatively recent. So there's a series of them where we have made quite significant changes across that end-to-end process, and they're listed there: Legionella testing, asbestos surveys, the handing back of keys, work in Richard's area around the allocations process, etc. What we're not seeing is any of those coming through in the statistics yet, because these are historical. These have been in void. They've been subject to maybe not a particularly efficient process. Once those are kicking in as such, you know, we should be able now to see a reduction in numbers, and then we will need to continuously review then what else is there to do within that end-to-end process that is still not as efficient as it needs to be. We know there's some work in Richard's area that is ongoing, and inevitably I think there's some reflections about, for example, void standard. Is the void standard right? Is it too high spec, etc.? Does it need to reduce a little bit, etc.? But we will need to make those considerations further, and we will have to also ask ourselves, have we got sufficient staffing, etc., to deliver this within the kind of time frame that we expect? Because I think it doesn't explicitly say that here, but everybody will be able to understand that a long void time means a loss of rent. And we from a HRA business planning perspective, that has to be tackled. It's also from a housing needs perspective, when you have such pressure in TA, you shouldn't have that kind of length of time when we're waiting for homes that are available to us to come back into use. So there's multiple reasons why that is unacceptable. So I'm hoping that when we report next, that hopefully we'll be able to see some of those mitigations kick in, and a good drop. And where we've got historical data that is still sort of in the system, I'm going to have a think about how I can separate it out to see what the current picture is versus the historical, and see where the progress is. So yeah, it remains challenging, but we've done some critical
Thank you.
work.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how frequently we see. Do we see this 6 monthly? Okay, fab. So maybe in the next 6 months. I mean, if there is an update in the interim that flags up and kind of, because I think it gets reported to you quarterly. So if it starts to show up in the quarterly figures, it would be really interesting for us to see. Or if it doesn't, that would maybe be interesting to see.
Yeah, if you updated, I mean, we're monitoring this on a sort of weekly, monthly basis operationally as officers. So we can update formally or informally as you wish. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. In which case, I think we're ready to move on, if seeing no other hands. Ready to move on to the work plan. Officers, thank you so much for your time. Feel free to stay. You may want to stay for the work plan. You may not want to, particularly Richard and Neris, but totally up to you. And so thanks very much for all of your time and input. And I'm going to hand over to Alice now.
Thank you. So the provisional work plan is included in the agenda pack, and I've also included the suggestions for 2024-25 alongside that, which most of those have been tentatively scheduled into the work plan just to kind of give you something to work with. The suggestions were either carried over from last year if they weren't considered, but they were kept on the list, or they arose as part of sort of the panel's work last year. And if it made sense to have, a regular update, I've kind of tentatively scheduled those in for sort of an annual update. There's been 2 additional suggestions since the agenda was published that I've tentatively started to engage with officers around, which is an update on the Housing First stuff that the panel received last year, and also a bit more regular information around temporary accommodation and homelessness demand to come to the panel. So I have sort of tentatively had those conversations as well. So the panel is asked to agree the work plan as it is or with any amendments. And if there's any additional suggestions for scrutiny commission items, we just need to be mindful of the very limited officer capacity with sort of the compliance work, the Social Housing Act and stuff like that. So we might need to have conversations about that if there's anything else suggested, sorry. But yeah, over to you, Chair.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on any of the conversations around those 2 additional items, because obviously, as we've heard, there's a lot of tension in terms of staff time within the housing department, and they're doing some really important things, but at the same time, really important to have scrutiny, particularly of those things. So Alice and I are talking about getting that balance right. But I wondered if anyone had any other suggestions. Rosie?
Thanks. I was just wondering about the implementation of the selective licensing scheme just the following year, and the recommendation that there won't be any update available probably until June, July. I just wondered why that particular timing, because that might make total sense. Just interested.
Go ahead, Alice.
Yeah, so it's a timing issue. So when they reported to the panel in March, because it was towards the end of the financial year, I think the reporting for officers was very difficult because they started including data from the next financial year and it just got a bit confused. So that was why that was.
I guess the only other thing to note is that the August meeting, as I think we know is very likely, unless something absolutely urgent comes along, to be cancelled because we don't have any work upcoming for it. Does anyone have any, but we may look, depending, especially because it looks like there's quite a lot of things coming down the track towards winter, we may look towards scheduling an additional meeting then, but we're going to see sort of how that plays out. And I guess it depends on some of the conversations we have around additional work as well. Does anyone have any additional things they'd like to suggest? Any questions? Rosie, yeah.
Sorry, the last thing I was just going to ask about was the housing associations. I know that's one that we decided to deprioritize. I just wondered whether there was an interest. I know it's a new group this time round, but yeah, just maybe useful to recap on that for the new people. Just wanted to raise it again.
Sure, I think that's a question around sort of partly capacity as well. So if it comes up as part of the work they're doing, I think it would involve quite a lot of officer time as well. And I think there was some question around, some of it will be really useful, but I think, yeah, I'll hand over to Alice to kind of maybe give you a fuller picture than I can.
Yeah, so I suppose just for the benefit of any panel members not on the panel, this related to a Scrutiny Commission sort of mini review around housing associations' approach to tenant engagement in the city. So the scope was worked up and agreed, but basically the capacity in housing services is just non-existent really at the minute for other work. But I was going to suggest what I could do is actually just pop that suggestion back on the list just so it's not lost. And then we can just keep that on until such a time where there might be capacity, and then at least it's there for the panel to consider.
Yeah, because I don't think it's a particularly time sensitive one and might be something really valuable as well. And it might come out as part of other work that we do as well. But I think that would be, the idea was also to sort of have invite the housing association representatives along so we could discuss with them as well. So I think there's potentially some positive things there. Right. Any other comments or concerns or questions? Seeing none. Are we happy to agree the work plan? Yeah, fantastic. Do I need to take a vote on that? No. And then item 10, so report back on recommendations. This is item 6 in your agenda pack because now we're at the bits of the meeting we not deprioritised, but moved around to maximise officer time. So on the 13th of March and the 12th of June, Cabinet considered recommendations related to 3 reports, and the responses are in the agenda pack. So if anyone's got any comments, questions, I know you might, Edward, around any of those, feel free to do so. Yeah, Edward.
Yeah, so this is what I should brought up earlier. That I brought up earlier. So I was in touch with the committee of the Oxford branch of Acorn, the tenants union, and they are keen to engage on the impact of the selective licensing scheme. So I do have contact details for them, so I'm happy to forward those on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that would be helpful. I think they are doing sort of ongoing engagement as well, but if that's not something that I think we could maybe pass that on as a sort of some people, I think that they've said they're doing it already, but I don't know if they listed exactly who with. So Alice, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Councillor Mundy, if you want to forward those details to me, I can put you in touch with the relevant officers, or however you want to do it. If you email me direct, I'll help you sort it.
I'll send that to Alice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Fab, brilliant. Thank you, Edward. Asimo, yes.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, this might be a bit obvious, but I just was wondering when I was reading the papers. Under the one which is implementation of selective licensing, there's a recommendation that the council rolls out selective licensing scheme communications. And in regard to those communications, I'm just wondering, I'm sure the officers already do make sure that they're inclusive and not only digital, and that there's translations and they're available in public places and stuff like that. Just checking if that is something that's kind of monitored and done.
Thanks, Esma. Maybe, yeah, Alice, could you come back on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say I can ask the question and then report back to the panel because I don't have that information, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I had another question. It was the one, well, it's partly a comment. It's the kind of earmarked funding for the severe weather emergency protocol, which I think is really good to kind of set aside for that specifically. In the kind of a comment from the recommendation, it says that there's a £30,000 budget. What if one year there's an absolute disaster in, weather emergency and more than 30,000 is needed? Is there any kind of like second plan in place where more funding could be? Because I know usually the case is that that funding's not used year on year, but if need be, if some natural disaster happens, where would the more money come from? Is that a possibility to, I don't know, consider?
I think we talked about this in the committee, as far as I can remember, and I don't want to answer with authority because I'm not a housing officer. And maybe Alice could ask a question of them again, but I think it would just be an overspend if there was a natural disaster. But maybe Alice can ask the question of them just to clarify that. But it was quite a while ago, so that's sort of me racking my brains. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any, so that means that we can we note the responses and just nod at me? Fantastic, thank you everyone. And just to note the dates of future meetings. So what I'd like to ask you to do is, as I sort of preempted, there's no business for the 7th of August meeting. Do you mind if we tentatively cancel that one unless there's sort of an urgent relevant item added to the forward plan? Fab. Thank you. Okay. In which case, I think we're all done. So thank you so much. Lovely to have you back on the panel, Rosie, and lovely to have you